I laid my only son to rest 2 months ago. Last week, his wife told me to pack my bags. She wanted the house for herself and her new friend. I left without a word, but I remembered what my son whispered to me a year before he was gone. "Behind the painting, Dad. That thing will protect you." What had he hidden, and why did his wife want me out so badly? The grocery bags felt heavier than usual as I climbed the front steps of what had been my home for 30 years. The house looked different somehow. Cleaner, more sterile. The old welcome mat with the Mallorys, printed in faded letters, was gone, replaced by a sleek black one with geometric patterns. I fumbled with my keys, noticing the porch light had been changed from the warm yellow bulb I preferred to a harsh white LED. When I opened the door, I found my life packed into cardboard boxes stacked neatly in the foyer. "Frank, there you are." Sienna emerged from the kitchen, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, wearing one of those expensive pantsuits she favored for work. Behind her stood a woman I'd seen before, but never really met. Tall, Asian, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "What's all this?" I asked, though my stomach was already sinking. "We need to talk." Sienna gestured toward the living room where more boxes waited. "This is Mira Choi, my attorney. She's been helping me sort through some legal matters." Mira stepped forward, extending a manicured hand. "Mr. Mallory, I'm sorry for your loss. Your son was clearly a wonderful man." I shook her hand briefly, noting how she held eye contact a beat too long, like she was studying me. "Thank you, though I'm not sure why I need to meet your lawyer in my own home." "That's what we need to discuss." Sienna sat on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid. "Frank, I know this is difficult, but I think it's time for you to find your own place. This house holds too many painful memories, and I need to make a fresh start. For Ariel's sake." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You want me to move out?" "I think it's what Darren would have wanted," Sienna said, invoking my son's name like a weapon. "He always worried about you being alone, and now, well, you need to learn to be independent again." I looked around the room where I'd taught Darren to ride a bike on rainy days, where we'd built countless Lego sets, where he'd told me about meeting Sienna in college. The family photos were gone from the mantel, replaced by abstract art pieces I'd never seen before. "Where's Ariel?" I asked. My 8-year-old granddaughter was the light of my life, especially since losing her father. "At school," Sienna said quickly. "Frank, I've already arranged for movers to help you tomorrow. My brother Tom has offered to let you stay in his garage apartment until you find something permanent." My brother Tom. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since he'd made it clear he thought I was too dependent on Darren's family. The garage apartment was barely habitable. No kitchen, a bathroom the size of a closet, and heating that worked when it felt like it. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "This is my home. Darren grew up here. I raised him here after his mother was gone." Mira cleared her throat. "Mr. Mallory, I understand this is emotional, but legally, the house belongs to Sienna now. As Darren's spouse, she inherited all his assets. You have no legal claim to remain here." "Legal claim?" The words tasted bitter. "I've lived here for 30 years. I paid the mortgage. The mortgage that Darren took over 5 years ago," Sienna interrupted. "The house that he put in both our names when we got married. Frank, you've been living here as our guest since then. A welcome guest, but still a guest." I felt the room spinning slightly. It was true that Darren had insisted on taking over the mortgage payments when he got his promotion at the engineering firm. He'd said it was his way of giving back, of taking care of his old man. I'd been grateful. My electrician's pension didn't stretch as far as it used to. "What about Ariel?" I managed. "She needs her grandfather, especially now." "Ariel will be fine," Sienna said, though something flickered in her eyes. "She's resilient, and she'll still see you, of course. Just not every day. It's not healthy for her to be around so much grief." Mira was taking notes on a legal pad, her pen scratching across the paper with mechanical precision. I noticed she wore no wedding ring, but there was a thin tan line where one might have been recently removed. "I need time to think about this," I said. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Mira said smoothly. "We have new arrangements that need to be implemented quickly, for everyone's benefit." "What new arrangements?" Sienna and Mira exchanged a glance, quick but loaded with meaning. "I'm making some changes in my life," Sienna said. "Career changes. Living situation changes. I need space to figure things out." That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs and saw Ariel peeking around the corner, still in her school uniform. Her dark hair was messy, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd been crying. "Grandpa Frank!" She ran to me, wrapping her small arms around my waist. I heard Mom talking on the phone. "Are you really leaving?" I knelt down to her level, my knees creaking in protest. I might need to stay somewhere else for a while, sweetheart. But why? This is your house too. Ariel, go to your room, Sienna said sharply. We're having an adult conversation. I want to stay with Grandpa Frank. Ariel, room, now. My granddaughter's lower lip trembled, but she obeyed. As she walked toward the stairs, she turned back and mouthed something to me. It took me a moment to realize what she was saying. Help me. The sound of her bedroom door slamming shut echoed through the house like an explosion of noise. She'll adjust, Sienna said, but her voice lacked conviction. Children are more adaptable than we think. I stood slowly, my mind racing. Something was very wrong here. Sienna had never been warm, but she'd never been cruel either. And this lawyer, Mira, seemed awfully involved for someone just handling paperwork. When do you want me gone? I asked quietly. Tomorrow would be ideal, Mira said. We have contractors coming to do some renovations. Renovations? Darren just repainted the kitchen last spring. Things change, Sienna said. Tastes evolve. As I looked around the room one more time, I noticed something else. The old oil painting that had hung above the fireplace for decades, a mountain lake scene that Darren had always loved, was gone. In its place hung a modern piece, all sharp angles and cold colors. Where's the lake painting? I asked. Sienna looked confused for a moment. Oh, that old thing? I had the movers put it in the basement. It doesn't really fit with the new aesthetic I'm going for. The new aesthetic. As if 30 years of memories could be erased with better lighting and contemporary art. I'll need to get some things from the basement, I said. Of course, Mira said quickly. But perhaps it would be better to do that when you have help with the moving. Some of those stairs can be treacherous. There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. She was nervous about something. Her pen had stopped moving, and she was gripping it tightly enough that her knuckles were white. I'll be careful, I said. Actually, Sienna stood up. I think we should call it a day. You must be tired, and there's a lot to process. Why don't you go to Tom's tonight? I'll have the movers bring your things tomorrow. I'd rather pack my own belongings, if you don't mind. I do mind, actually. Sienna's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. I think it's better if we handle this professionally, less emotional that way. Mira nodded approvingly. It's usually easier when there's some distance from the sentimental aspects. Sentimental aspects, like 30 years of life, of raising a son, of building a family. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard where Darren had learned to throw a baseball, where we'd grilled burgers every 4th of July, where I'd taught him to change the oil in his first car. The swing set was gone, even though Ariel still used it sometimes. When did you take down the swing set? I asked. Last week, Sienna said. Ariel's getting too old for it. But I'd seen her on it just 2 weeks ago, pumping her legs and laughing as she tried to swing high enough to touch the oak tree branches with her toes. I should say goodbye to her, I said. She's doing homework. I don't want to disrupt her routine any more than necessary. I nodded, understanding that I was being dismissed. As I walked toward the door, I passed the housekeeper, Lucia, who was coming in with a load of laundry. She'd worked for our family for 15 years, ever since Darren started making good money and insisted we needed help around the house. Lucia was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and calloused hands. She'd been more of a grandmother to Ariel than Sienna's own mother, who lived in Florida and visited twice a year. Mr. Frank, she said softly, then glanced nervously at Sienna and Mira. She pressed something small into my hand. An envelope. From Darren, she whispered. He asked me to give this to you if anything happened. Sienna was suddenly beside us. Lucia, what are you doing? Just saying goodbye to Mr. Frank, Lucia said, but I could see her hands shaking slightly. Well, hurry up. We have a lot to do before tomorrow. I slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard Mira say something to Sienna in a low voice, something that sounded like, should have done this weeks ago. Outside, I sat in my old pickup truck for a long time, staring at the house where I'd lived most of my adult life. The windows glowed warmly in the evening light, but somehow the place felt cold and unfamiliar. I pulled out the envelope Lucia had given me. It was sealed, with my name written in Darren's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message. Dad, if you're reading this, something has happened to me and you're probably in trouble. Remember what I told you about the painting? Behind it, in the old safe. That thing will protect you. The key is where we used to hide your birthday presents. Trust Lucia, trust Dorian. Don't trust anyone else until you know what's really going on. I love you. Darren. My hands were shaking as I read it again. The painting. Darren had mentioned it once, about a year before he was gone. We'd been working in the basement, and he'd pointed to the old mountain lake painting that used to hang down there before Sienna moved it upstairs. "Dad," he'd said, "if anything ever happens to me, look behind that painting. That thing will protect you." I'd asked him what he meant, but he'd just smiled and changed the subject. I'd assumed it was just one of those random thoughts that pop into your head when you're doing manual labor, but now, sitting in my truck with an eviction notice in the form of packed boxes, Darren's words took on new meaning. I started the engine and drove toward Tom's garage, my mind churning. What was behind the painting? And why had Darren felt the need to prepare for something happening to him? More importantly, why was Sienna so eager to get me out of the house? And what was she really planning with her attorney friend who took notes like she was building a legal case? As I pulled into Tom's driveway, one thought kept echoing in my head. Darren had known something was coming. He'd tried to protect me. Now I needed to figure out what that protection was and how to use it. Tom's garage apartment was exactly as depressing as I'd remembered. The single room smelled like motor oil and damp concrete, with a hot plate that looked like a fire hazard and a bathroom so small I had to step into the shower to close the door. "It's not the Ritz," Tom said, setting down the 2 bags I'd managed to grab from my truck, "but it's got a roof and running water. Mostly." My younger brother had aged hard over the past few years. His hair was completely gray now, and his face carried the permanent squint of someone who'd spent too much time looking at engine problems in bad light. "I appreciate this," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Look, Frank, I'm not going to pretend I understand what happened with Sienna, but maybe this is for the best. You've been living in that house like a shadow ever since Darren was gone. Maybe it's time to start your own life again." I wanted to argue with him, but I was too tired and too unsettled. Instead, I just nodded and waited for him to leave so I could think. The envelope from Darren felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I read the note again, trying to decode every word. The key was where we used to hide birthday presents. When Darren was young, we had a tradition of hiding gifts in increasingly creative places around the house. His favorite spot had been inside the old electrical panel in the basement, the one I'd replaced when he was 12 but never bothered to remove. I lay down on the narrow cot that passed for a bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Something was very wrong with the whole situation. Sienna had been distant since Darren was gone, but not hostile, and the way she and Mira had looked at each other, the way they seemed to communicate without words, it reminded me of how Darren and I used to work together on electrical jobs, anticipating each other's moves. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Grandpa Frank, it's Ariel. I borrowed Mom's old phone. Are you okay? I'm scared." I stared at the message for a long moment. Ariel was smart for 8 years old, but where had she gotten an old phone, and how did she know my number? I texted back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Are you okay?" The response came quickly. "Mom has been acting weird. She and Ms. Mira talk in whispers and stop when I come in the room. They're changing everything in the house. They threw away Daddy's tools." Darren's tools. He'd had a complete workshop in the basement, filled with professional-grade equipment that had cost thousands of dollars. I'd helped him organize it just a month before he was gone. "Are they still at the house?" I texted. "Yes. They're in the basement now. Ms. Mira has been here every night this week." Every night. I thought about the way they'd looked at each other, the casual familiarity in their body language. Mira wasn't just Sienna's attorney. She was something more. "Ariel, I want you to be very careful. Don't let them know you're texting me, okay?" "Okay." "Grandpa Frank, I found something in Daddy's workshop, a book with numbers and names. Should I hide it?" My pulse quickened. "Yes. Hide it somewhere safe, somewhere only you know about." "Okay. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." I sat up, suddenly wide awake. Darren had left me a message about something behind the painting. Ariel had found a book with numbers and names. And Sienna was so eager to get me out of the house that she'd packed my belongings while I was grocery shopping. I thought about calling my old friend Dorian Vance. Darren had mentioned trusting him in the note. Dorian had been my partner when I first started doing electrical work, before he'd moved into private investigation. We'd stayed close over the years, and he'd been one of the few people who truly understood my grief after Darren was gone. But it was past 10 o'clock, and I needed to think this through before I involved anyone else. Instead, I decided to do some research of my own. I pulled out my laptop, a gift from Darren 2 Christmases ago, and started searching for information about Mira Choi. What I found was interesting. Mira Choi was indeed an attorney, specializing in estate planning and real estate law. She had her own practice, Choi and Partners, though I couldn't find any information about who the partners were. Her website was professional but sparse, with no personal information beyond her credentials. But when I searched for her name in local news archives, I found something more revealing. 6 months ago, there had been a small item in the business section about a real estate deal that had fallen through due to irregularities in the documentation. The attorney representing the seller had been Mira Choi. I dug deeper, using some of the search techniques Dorian had taught me over the years. In public records, I found that Mira had recently purchased a house in an expensive neighborhood across town. The purchase price was well above what a small practice attorney should have been able to afford, even with a good mortgage. More interesting was the timing. She'd bought the house just 2 weeks after Darren's funeral. I was about to close the laptop when I remembered something else. Sienna had mentioned renovations, contractors coming to the house. I searched for recent building permits in our neighborhood. There it was, a permit application for interior renovation and structural modifications at my old address. The application had been filed 3 weeks ago, well before tonight's conversation about me moving out. The contractor listed was someone I'd never heard of, and the scope of work was vague. But what really caught my attention was the signature on the application. It wasn't Sienna's. It was a name I didn't recognize. S. Mallory Choi. Mallory Choi. As if Sienna and Mira were already planning to combine their lives, their names, their assets. I closed the laptop and lay back down, my mind racing. Darren had suspected something. He'd hidden something behind that painting, something he thought would protect me. And Sienna was moving fast to get me out of the house before I could find it. I thought about the way Mira had taken notes during our conversation, the way she'd seemed more interested in legal details than emotional ones, the way she'd insisted I shouldn't go to the basement alone. What was behind that painting? And why were they so afraid of me finding it? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Ariel. They're coming upstairs. I hid the book. Grandpa Frank, I think they're going to take the painting down tomorrow. I sat up so fast I nearly fell off the cot. If they were planning to remove the painting, I had to act tonight. Whatever Darren had hidden, I needed to find it before Sienna and Mira destroyed the evidence. I looked at my watch. It was almost midnight. The house would be dark, and hopefully everyone would be asleep. I still had my keys. Sienna hadn't thought to ask for them back, and I knew every creaky board and squeaky hinge in that house. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the truck. It was time to find out what my son had left behind to protect me. The drive back to the house took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the neighborhood I'd called home for 3 decades. The streetlights cast long shadows between the houses, and the October air was crisp enough to make me pull my jacket tighter. The house was dark except for a single light in the master bedroom. I could see 2 silhouettes moving around inside, Sienna and Mira, probably planning their next moves. I crept around to the back door, using the key as quietly as possible. The door opened with barely a whisper, and I slipped inside, grateful for all the times I'd oiled those hinges over the years. The basement stairs were at the far end of the kitchen. I made my way slowly, avoiding the loose floorboard near the refrigerator and the cabinet door that always swung open if you brushed against it. The basement was pitch black, but I knew it by feel. I found the light switch and flicked it on, hoping the upstairs occupants wouldn't notice the glow from the small basement windows. The mountain lake painting was exactly where Sienna had said, leaning against the far wall, covered with a dusty sheet. I pulled the sheet away and studied the painting I'd looked at thousands of times over the years. It was a simple landscape. Nothing fancy, painted by Darren's mother back when she was taking art classes. She'd been proud of it, and after she was gone, I hung it in the living room as a way to keep her memory close. When Darren got married, Sienna moved it to the basement, saying it didn't fit her decorating style. I lifted the painting and examined the wall behind it. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the same wood paneling that covered the rest of the basement walls. But then I noticed something. The paneling behind where the painting had hung was slightly different, newer, with screws instead of the original nails. Someone had modified this section of the wall. I ran my fingers along the edges and found what I was looking for, a small gap where the panel could be lifted away. Behind it was a metal safe, built into the wall between the studs. The safe had a combination lock, but there was also a keyhole. I thought about Darren's note. The key is where we used to hide your birthday presents. The old electrical panel was mounted on the opposite wall. I opened it carefully, noting that the circuits were still labeled in Darren's neat handwriting. Behind the main breaker, taped to the back of the panel, was a small brass key. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key into the safe. It turned easily, and the door swung open with a soft click. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with documents. I pulled it out and opened it carefully. The first document was a deed. A life estate deed that granted me the right to live in the house for the rest of my life. It was dated just 6 months before Darren was gone and had been properly notarized and recorded with the county. According to this document, I wasn't a guest in the house. I was a legal resident with rights that couldn't be revoked by anyone, including Darren's heirs. The second document was even more startling. It was a copy of Darren's life insurance policy showing a benefit of $500,000. But instead of naming Sienna as the sole beneficiary, the policy had been changed. The primary beneficiary was listed as the Ariel Mallory Trust, with me named as the trustee. Sienna was listed only as a secondary beneficiary, entitled to a small portion of the total amount. There were other papers as well, bank statements showing a separate account in Ariel's name, investment records, and what appeared to be a private investigator's report with Mira Choi's name featured prominently. But the most revealing document sat at the bottom of the stack. It was a photocopy of a marriage certificate, dated just 2 months earlier, showing that Mira Choi and Sienna Mallory had been legally married in a small ceremony in Nevada. They weren't just friends, or even just involved. They were married, and according to the investigator's report, they had been planning it for months before Darren was gone. I sat back on my heels, trying to process what I was reading. Darren had known. Somehow, he'd discovered that his wife was planning to leave him, planning to take everything and disappear with her new spouse. But he'd fought back. He'd protected me, protected Ariel, and protected his assets from a woman who was already married to someone else when she inherited his estate. I was so absorbed in the documents that I almost didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs above me, almost. I quickly stuffed the papers back into the envelope and closed the safe. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could hear voices, Sienna and Mira, talking in low, urgent tones. "I'm telling you, someone's been in the house," Mira was saying. "The back door wasn't locked the way I left it." "It's probably just Lucia," Sienna replied, but she sounded nervous. "She has keys." "At midnight? I don't think so." I looked around frantically for a hiding spot. The basement had plenty of dark corners, but nowhere that would conceal me if they turned on all the lights. Then I remembered something Darren had shown me years ago, a crawl space behind the water heater that led to an unused storage area under the front porch. It was cramped and dirty, but it was hidden. I grabbed the envelope and squeezed into the crawl space just as the basement lights came on. "See? There's nothing here," Sienna was saying, but I could hear her moving around, checking corners. "The painting's been moved," Mira said. "Look at the dust pattern on the floor. Maybe the movers shifted it when they were down here earlier." "We didn't have movers down here today, Sienna. Someone's been looking for something." There was a long pause, and I held my breath, pressing myself as far back into the crawl space as possible. "You think Frank knows?" Sienna asked finally. "I think Frank is a lot smarter than we gave him credit for," Mira replied. "We should have handled this differently from the beginning. It's too late for that now. The papers are filed, the sale is in motion. We just need to get through the next few days. And if he's found Darren's insurance?" Another long pause. "Then we have bigger problems than we thought." I listened as they searched the basement for another few minutes, but eventually they gave up and went back upstairs. I waited another hour before crawling out of my hiding spot, my clothes covered in dust and cobwebs. The envelope was still clutched in my hand, its contents now burning with new significance. Darren hadn't just protected me. He'd uncovered a fraud that could send both women to prison, but I needed help to figure out how to use this information. I needed someone I could trust, someone who understood legal procedures and evidence handling. I needed Dorian. I made my way out of the house as carefully as I'd entered, but this time I was carrying the ammunition I needed to fight back. Darren's voice echoed in my memory. "That thing will protect you, Dad." He'd been right. Now I just had to figure out how to use it. I called Dorian at 6 a.m, knowing he'd be awake. Old habits from our electrical work days. We'd always started early to beat the heat. "Frank? Jesus, what time is it?" "I need to see you," I said without preamble. "It's about Darren, about Sienna. I found something." There was a pause, and I could hear him sitting up in bed. "What kind of something?" "The kind that explains why they wanted me out of the house so fast. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner? And Dorian, bring your investigator stuff. We're going to need it." Murphy's Diner was one of those old-fashioned places that served coffee strong enough to jolt anyone awake and breakfast portions big enough to feed a construction crew. Dorian was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his laptop bag and a manila folder. He looked older than I remembered. His dark hair was shot through with gray, and there were new lines around his eyes. But his handshake was still firm, and his eyes were as sharp as ever. "You look like hell," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "I feel like hell, but I think I know why." I pulled out Darren's envelope and spread the contents across the table, keeping my voice low as I explained what I'd found. Dorian's expression grew more serious with each document. "Holy hell, Frank," he whispered, examining the marriage certificate. They're already married, while she was still married to Darren? That's bigamy, right? That's the least of their problems. If she inherited Darren's estate while legally married to someone else, he shook his head. This invalidates everything. The house, the insurance money, all of it. So I can go home? You can do more than that. You can have them arrested. Dorian pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the documents. But we need to be smart about this. If they realize what you found, they'll try to destroy evidence or disappear. What do you mean, disappear? Think about it, Frank. Mira's a lawyer. She knows exactly how much trouble they're in, and according to this investigator's report, they've been planning this for months. They probably have exit strategies. I thought about the building permit I'd found online, the one signed S. Mallory Choi. I think they're planning to sell the house quickly and leave town with the money. Probably, but now we can stop them. Dorian studied the life estate deed. This is solid, Frank. Darren made sure you'd be protected, but there's something else we need to consider. What? Ariel. If Sienna and Mira get arrested, what happens to her? I hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know. She doesn't have any other family on Sienna's side. Sienna's parents are gone, and she was an only child. Which means you might end up raising her. Are you prepared for that? The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. I loved Ariel more than anything, but I was 68 years old. Was I really ready to raise a child? We'll figure that out later, I said. Right now, I just want to make sure she's safe and that these women don't get away with stealing everything Darren worked for. Dorian nodded and pulled out a legal pad. Okay, here's what we need to do. First, we get copies of all these documents to a lawyer. A real one, not someone who's committing fraud. Second, we gather more evidence about their activities. And third, we document everything they're doing so we can prove intent to defraud. How do we do that? Leave that to me. I still have contacts in the police department, and I know a few people who can help us build a case. But Frank, you need to be careful. Don't let them know you suspect anything. Act like you're cooperating with the move. They want me out by today. They're having movers come. Let them move your stuff, but make sure you keep copies of these documents somewhere safe, and stay in touch with Ariel if you can. She might see things that could be important. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Ariel. Grandpa Frank, they're taking Daddy's painting to the basement, and Mom is crying. I think she's scared. I showed the message to Dorian. They're moving the painting back to the basement. They must have realized someone found the safe. Or they're planning to get rid of it entirely. We need to move fast. Dorian spent the next hour making phone calls while I sat in the diner, drinking coffee and trying to process everything that was happening. My son had discovered his wife's betrayal and had spent his final months protecting his family from her. The thought of him carrying that burden alone made my chest tight with grief and anger. Okay, Dorian said, hanging up from his last call. I've got a meeting set up with Detective Talia Martinez at 2 o'clock. She handles financial crimes, and she's good people. I've also contacted a lawyer named James Peterson who specializes in estate fraud. He'll meet with us tomorrow morning. What should I do in the meantime? Go back to Tom's. Act normal. Let the movers do their thing, but keep your eyes open and document everything you see. Take pictures, keep notes. And Frank? Yeah? Don't go back to that house alone. If they're desperate enough to commit bigamy and insurance fraud, they might be desperate enough to do something worse. The drive back to Tom's garage felt different this time. Instead of feeling defeated and confused, I felt like I had a purpose. Darren had given me the tools I needed to fight back. Now I just had to use them wisely. The movers were already at the house when I arrived, loading boxes into a truck. I recognized one of them, Jerry Kowalski, who'd done electrical work with me on a few jobs over the years. Hey, Frank, he said, looking uncomfortable. Sorry about all this, man. Seems wrong, making you move out of your own place. It's okay, Jerry. Just business, right? Yeah, but still. He lowered his voice. Between you and me, that lady in there is acting real strange. She's watching us like she thinks we're going to steal something, and she won't let us into certain rooms. Which rooms? The basement, for one, and the master bedroom. She says those areas are off limits. Jerry shook his head. In 30 years of moving, I've never had someone tell me I couldn't pack their own stuff. That was interesting. Sienna was compartmentalizing, keeping the movers away from areas that might contain evidence of her fraud. Jerry, do me a favor. If you see anything weird, anything that doesn't seem right, give me a call. Sure thing, Frank. You got my number. I went inside to supervise the packing of my personal belongings. Sienna was there, dressed in another expensive suit, directing the movers with military precision. Mira was nowhere to be seen, but I could hear someone moving around upstairs. "Frank," Sienna said when she saw me. "I'm glad you're here. I wanted to make sure we didn't pack anything that belongs to the house." "Everything in those boxes is mine," I said. "I've lived here for 30 years, Sienna. I know what belongs to me." "Of course. I just meant, well, sometimes people get confused about shared items, kitchen appliances, tools, that sort of thing." Tools. I thought about what Ariel had texted, that they'd thrown away Darren's tools. What happened to Darren's workshop? I donated most of it to charity. He had so much equipment, and it was just sitting there unused. Donated to charity, or sold for cash. Darren's tools had been professional grade, worth thousands of dollars. "That's too bad," I said. "I would have liked to keep some of them, for sentimental reasons." "Oh?" Sienna looked genuinely surprised. You have your own tools." "Not like Darren's. He had some pieces that belonged to my father, tools that had been in the family for generations." It was a lie, but I wanted to see how she'd react. Sure enough, she looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Frank. If I'd known, but it's too late now. They've already been picked up." "When?" "Yesterday, right after you left, actually." So they'd moved quickly to get rid of evidence. That suggested they knew I might come looking for things. "Well," I said, "I guess that's that." One of the movers called my name from the living room. "Mr. Mallory? We're having trouble with this old electrical panel. It seems to be stuck." My heart jumped. They were trying to remove the panel where Darren had hidden the safe key. I walked into the living room, where two men were standing next to the decorative electrical box that had been installed when we'd renovated the kitchen. "That's just for show now," I said quickly. "The real electrical panel is in the basement. This one was disconnected years ago." "Oh, okay." The lady told us to pack it, said it was an antique. I looked at Sienna, who was standing in the doorway. "You want to keep the old electrical panel?" "I thought it might have historical value," she said, but her eyes were avoiding mine. She wasn't interested in historical value. She was trying to make sure I couldn't get back into the house and access the safe again. If I still had the key, she wanted to make sure I couldn't use it. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to keep that panel. It was one of the first ones I ever installed professionally. Sentimental value, you know?" I suppose that would be all right." "Great. Jerry, can you load that in my truck instead of the moving van?" "Sure thing, Mr. Mallory." As the movers continued their work, I took pictures with my phone, the empty rooms, the missing family photos, the new furniture that had appeared seemingly overnight, everything Dorian had told me about documenting evidence. Around noon, Mira finally came downstairs. She was carrying a briefcase and looked like she'd been working all morning. "Frank," she said with a professional smile, "how's the move going?" "Fine. Just taking my time to make sure I don't forget anything important. Of course, though I should mention that we'll need to change the locks this afternoon, for security reasons." "Security reasons?" "Well, you'll have keys to a house you no longer live in. I'm sure you understand the liability issues." I understood, all right. They wanted to make sure I couldn't get back in to look for more evidence. "That makes sense," I said. "I'll leave my keys on the kitchen counter when I'm done." "Thank you. I appreciate your cooperation." Mira headed toward the basement, and I heard her talking to someone on her phone. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone was urgent. My phone buzzed with another text from Ariel. "Grandpa Frank, I'm at school, but I'm worried. Mom packed my things this morning and said we might be going on a trip soon. I don't want to leave. What should I do?" A trip. They were planning to leave town, probably as soon as they could liquidate their assets and close the house sale. I texted back, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything is going to be okay. Just be good and do what your mom says for now." But inside, I was panicking. If they took Ariel and left the state, it would be much harder to get her back, even with the legal documents Darren had left me. I called Dorian from my truck. "They're planning to leave town," I said without preamble. "Ariel says Sienna packed her things for a trip." "How soon?" "I don't know. Soon, I think. They're changing the locks today, and they've been moving fast to get rid of evidence." "Okay, I'm going to call Detective Martinez and see if we can move up our meeting. In the meantime, keep an eye on them. If they try to leave with Ariel before we can get legal intervention, call 911. "Can I do that? Legally, I mean." "With the documents Darren left you, yes. You're the trustee of Ariel's inheritance, which gives you certain rights. And if we can prove Sienna's marriage to Darren was invalid due to bigamy, you might have grounds for emergency custody." "Might have grounds?" "Frank, I'm not a lawyer, but Peterson will know for sure. Just don't let them disappear with that little girl, okay?" I hung up and sat in my truck, watching the house where I'd raised my son and hoped to help raise my granddaughter. The movers were finishing up, loading the last of my belongings into their truck. 30 years of life, reduced to a few boxes and some furniture. But I had something they didn't know about. I had Darren's insurance policy, and I had the truth. Now I just had to figure out how to use them before it was too late. Detective Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of my son. She listened to our story without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "This is a complex case," she said when we finished. "We're looking at a potential bigamy, insurance fraud, document forgery, and possibly custodial interference if they try to leave the state with the child." "What can you do?" I asked. "Well, the good news is that these documents appear authentic. I'll need to verify them, of course, but if they check out, you have strong grounds for both criminal charges and civil action." "How long will verification take?" Dorian asked. "For the marriage certificate and life estate deed? A couple of days at most. The insurance policy might take longer. Those companies can be slow to respond." "We don't have a couple of days," I said. "They're planning to leave town with Ariel." Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Do you have any evidence of that? Plane tickets, moving arrangements, anything concrete?" I pulled out my phone and showed her Ariel's text about the trip. "This is from my granddaughter this morning." "That's not enough for an arrest warrant, but it might be enough for a welfare check. Let me make some calls." While she was on the phone, I sat in the police station waiting area, feeling more helpless than I had since Darren's funeral. Everything was moving too fast, and I was always one step behind. Dorian sat down beside me. "How are you holding up?" "I keep thinking about Darren, about how he must have felt when he realized what Sienna was doing. He was gone knowing his wife was betraying him, planning to take everything he'd worked for. He also left knowing he'd protected you and Ariel. That has to count for something." Detective Martinez came back with a serious look. "I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that I've confirmed the marriage certificate is legitimate. Sienna and Mira were legally married in Nevada 2 months ago. The bad news is that they've moved their plans forward." "What do you mean?" "I had an officer do a drive-by of your house. There's a moving truck there now, and it looks like they're loading personal belongings, not just your things." A sharp chill went through me. "They're leaving today?" "It looks that way. I'm going to request an emergency hearing for temporary custody based on the insurance documents and the bigamy issue. But that could take hours, and if they leave the state, they'll be gone," I finished. "There is one option," she said carefully. "You could go to the house and request to see Ariel. As her grandfather and the trustee of her inheritance, you have some rights. If they refuse, or if you have reason to believe she's in danger, you can call for immediate assistance." "Is that legal?" "It's a gray area, but given the circumstances, I think a judge would understand." Dorian and I exchanged glances. "I'll go with you," he said. "No," Detective Martinez said firmly. "If this goes wrong, I don't want multiple civilians involved. Frank goes alone, and we have units standing by." The drive back to my former home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept thinking about Ariel, about how scared and confused she must be. Did she understand what was happening? Did she know her mother had been lying to everyone? The moving truck was still there, along with Mira's car and a rental van I didn't recognize. Through the front windows, I could see people moving around inside. I parked across the street and called Detective Martinez. "I'm here. What exactly am I supposed to do?" "Ring the doorbell. Tell them you want to say goodbye to Ariel. See how they react. If they let you in, try to assess the situation. If they refuse, or if anything seems wrong, call me immediately." I walked up the front steps of the house where I'd lived for 30 years, feeling like a stranger. The doorbell echoed inside, and after a moment, Sienna opened the door. She looked harried, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes wrinkled. "Frank, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to say goodbye to Ariel before you left for your trip." Her expression tightened. "How did you? We're not going on a trip. We're just doing some reorganizing." "Then why is there a moving truck in the driveway?" "That's none of your business anymore, Frank. You don't live here." "I'd still like to see my granddaughter." "She's busy. Maybe another time." Sienna started to close the door, but I put my hand against it. "Sienna, she's 8 years old. She's lost her father, and now her grandfather is moving out. Don't you think she deserves a proper goodbye?" For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or uncertainty. But then Mira appeared behind her. "Is there a problem?" Mira asked. "Frank wants to see Ariel," Sienna said. "I told him she's busy." "I see." Mira studied me with those sharp lawyer eyes. Mr. Mallory, I understand your emotional attachment to the child, but you need to respect Sienna's wishes as Ariel's legal guardian. And you need to respect my rights as her grandfather and the trustee of her inheritance. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. Mira's expression didn't change, but I saw Sienna's face go pale. I'm not sure what you mean, Mira said carefully. I think you know exactly what I mean. Darren left very specific instructions about Ariel's future, instructions that you might find interesting. Mira and Sienna exchanged a quick glance. It was the same wordless communication I'd seen before, but this time I could read it clearly. They were deciding whether to call my bluff. Perhaps you should come in, Mira said finally, so we can discuss this privately. The house felt different as I stepped inside. It was almost empty now, with boxes stacked everywhere and furniture covered in moving blankets. The walls looked bare without the family photos, and there was an echo that hadn't been there before. Where's Ariel? I asked. Upstairs, packing her room, Sienna said. Frank, what did you mean about inheritance? I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of the insurance policy. I meant that Darren made some changes before he was gone, changes you might not be aware of. Mira took the phone and studied the image, her face growing paler with each line she read. Where did you get this? Darren left it for me, along with some other interesting documents. What other documents? Sienna's voice was barely a whisper. Why don't you tell me about your trip to Nevada 2 months ago? The silence that followed was deafening. Mira handed me back my phone with hands that were noticeably shaking. I think, she said slowly, that we need to have a very serious conversation. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Ariel appeared, dragging a small suitcase behind her. Grandpa Frank. She dropped the suitcase and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. I knew you'd come back. Hey, sweetheart, I said, hugging her tight. How are you doing? I'm scared, she whispered in my ear. Mom says we have to move far away, and I don't want to. I want to stay here with you. Ariel, go back upstairs, Sienna said sharply. The adults need to talk. No, Ariel said, surprising everyone. I want to stay with Grandpa Frank. I don't want to go on the trip. You don't have a choice, Mira said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, I said, I think she does. I pulled out another photo on my phone, the life estate deed. According to this document, I have the legal right to live in this house for the rest of my life, which means you can't sell it. And according to this, I showed them the insurance policy again. I'm the trustee of Ariel's inheritance, which gives me certain rights regarding her welfare. Sienna sank into one of the remaining chairs. Darren knew, she said quietly. Darren knew what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. About us, about Mira and me. He hired a private investigator. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. How long have you known? I found out last night. The question is, how long has this been going on? Mira stepped forward. Mr. Mallory, I think we can work something out. A financial arrangement that would be beneficial to everyone. You want to buy me off? I want to find a solution that doesn't involve lawyers and courts and a lot of unpleasant publicity. I looked down at Ariel, who was still clinging to me, then back at the 2 women who had been planning to steal everything my son had worked for. There's only one solution I'm interested in, I said. You leave. You go back to wherever you came from, and you leave Ariel with me. That's not going to happen, Sienna said, standing up. She's my daughter. She's Darren's daughter, and according to the documents he left, I'm responsible for protecting her interests. You're an old man living in a garage, Mira said coldly. No court is going to give you custody of a child. Maybe not, but no court is going to let a bigamist keep custody either. The word hung in the air like a slap. Sienna's face crumpled, and she started crying. Mira looked like she was calculating the odds of different legal strategies. Grandpa Frank, Ariel said quietly. What's bigamist? It means someone who's married to 2 people at the same time, I said. Which is against the law. Ariel looked confused. But Mom was only married to Daddy. That's right, sweetheart. But some people make mistakes. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. Units are in position. How's it going? I typed back. Need backup now? What are you doing? Mira asked, seeing me with the phone. Calling for help, I said simply. From who? The police? Sienna stopped crying and looked up at me with panic in her eyes. Frank, please. We can work this out. I know we've made mistakes, but the mistake was thinking you could steal from my son and get away with it. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance, getting closer. Mira grabbed Sienna's arm. We need to leave. Now. What about Ariel? Sienna asked. What about her? She'll be fine. She's my daughter. And she's evidence of a crime we committed. Do you want to go to prison? The sirens were getting louder. Ariel pressed closer to me, scared by the shouting and the approaching noise. It's okay, sweetheart, I told her. Everything's going to be okay. Sienna looked at her daughter, then at Mira, then at me. For a moment, I thought she might fight for Ariel, might remember that being a mother was more important than avoiding consequences. But then the police cars pulled into the driveway, and she made her choice. I'm sorry, she said to Ariel, tears streaming down her face. Mommy has to go away for a while. Where are you going? Ariel asked, but Sienna was already following Mira toward the back door. Detective Martinez came through the front door just as they disappeared into the backyard. Mr. Mallory, are you and the child all right? We're fine, I said, but they're running. Not for long, she said, speaking into her radio. Units 2 and 3, suspects are heading toward the back of the property. Ariel was crying now, confused and scared by everything that was happening. I picked her up, surprised by how light she felt, and carried her to the couch. What's happening, Grandpa Frank? Why did Mom run away? Your mom made some bad choices, sweetheart, but you're safe now. You're going to stay with me. Forever? I thought about the long legal battle ahead, the custody hearings and investigations and all the complicated adult problems that Ariel would have to navigate. But I also thought about Darren's documents, about the protection he'd built for his daughter, and about the home he'd made sure she'd always have. Forever, I said. Through the window, I could see police officers leading Sienna and Mira back toward the house in handcuffs. Sienna was still crying, but Mira looked defiant, like she was already planning her legal defense. Detective Martinez sat down across from us. Ariel, my name is Talia, and I'm a police officer. I need to ask you some questions, but first I want you to know that you're safe, okay? Ariel nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Good. Now, has anyone ever hurt you or made you feel unsafe? No, but Mom and Ms. Mira have been acting weird. They whisper a lot, and they've been throwing away Daddy's things. What kinds of things? His tools, his pictures, his clothes. Ariel looked up at me. I saved some stuff, though. I hid it in my room. That was very smart, Detective Martinez said. Would you show me what you saved? Ariel led us upstairs to her room, which was mostly packed except for a few toys and clothes. She went to her closet and moved some boxes, revealing a small hiding place behind the wall. Inside was a notebook, some photographs, and what looked like a small recording device. Daddy gave me this, Ariel said, holding up the recorder. He said if anything bad happened, I should use it to remember important things. Detective Martinez and I exchanged glances. Did you record anything, sweetheart? Just Mom and Ms. Mira talking. They said things about Daddy that made me sad. What kinds of things? They said he was stupid, and they laughed about taking his money. Ariel's lower lip trembled. They said I would forget about him when we moved away. I felt a surge of anger so strong it made my hands shake. How could they be so cruel to a child who had just lost her father? Ariel, Detective Martinez said gently, would it be okay if I listened to what you recorded? Ariel nodded and handed over the device. Detective Martinez put in earbuds and listened for a few minutes, her expression growing darker. This is very helpful, she said finally. Ariel, you did exactly the right thing. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble at all, but your mom and Ms. Mira are in very big trouble. Because they were mean to Daddy? Because they broke the law. And when people break the law, they have to face consequences. Ariel seemed to accept this with the matter-of-fact attitude that children sometimes have about adult problems. Does this mean I get to stay with Grandpa Frank? For now, yes, but there will be some meetings and paperwork to make sure everything is legal and proper. Will Mom come back? Detective Martinez looked at me, then back at Ariel. I don't know, honey. That depends on a lot of things. But no matter what happens, you'll be taken care of. As we went back downstairs, I could see Sienna and Mira being put into separate police cars. Sienna was looking up at the house, probably hoping to see Ariel one last time, but Mira was staring straight ahead, already focused on damage control. What happens now? I asked Detective Martinez. Now we process the evidence, file charges, and start the legal proceedings. You'll need to meet with Child Services to begin the custody process, and there will be hearings for both the criminal charges and the civil matters. How long will that take? Months, probably. But based on what I've seen today, I don't think you'll have any trouble gaining custody. The documents your son left are very thorough, and the evidence of fraud is overwhelming. I looked around the house that had been my home for 30 years, then down at Ariel, who was holding my hand and looking up at me with trust and hope in her eyes. "Can we go home now, Grandpa Frank?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We can go home." 6 months later, I was sitting in the same courtroom where Sienna and Mira had been sentenced, but this time I was there for a much happier reason. The judge was finalizing my legal guardianship of Ariel, and the insurance settlement had finally been processed. "Mr. Mallory," Judge Harrison said, looking over her reading glasses, "I've reviewed all the documents in this case, and I'm satisfied that this arrangement is in the best interests of the child. Ariel, do you understand what's happening today?" Ariel, now 9 years old and wearing a new dress for the occasion, nodded solemnly. "Grandpa Frank is going to be my legal guardian, which means he gets to take care of me and make decisions about my life." "That's right, and how do you feel about that?" "Happy," Ariel said simply. "He's the best grandpa in the world." Judge Harrison smiled. "I can see that. Mr. Mallory, you're taking on a big responsibility. Are you prepared for the challenges of raising a child at your age?" "Your Honor, I raised one child already, and he turned out pretty well. I think I can handle one more." "I'm sure you can. The court grants full legal guardianship to Franklin Mallory with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The gavel came down, and Ariel threw her arms around me. "We did it, Grandpa Frank." "Yes, we did, sweetheart." Dorian was sitting in the gallery behind us, grinning from ear to ear. He'd been invaluable throughout the entire process, helping me navigate the legal system and providing evidence for both the criminal case and the custody proceedings. After the hearing, we went to Murphy's Diner to celebrate, the same place where Dorian and I had first planned our strategy against Sienna and Mira. "So what's the final tally?" Dorian asked as we settled into our booth. "Well, the insurance money is held in trust for Ariel's education, almost $500,000. The house is legally mine for the rest of my life, then it passes to her. And the civil suit against Sienna and Mira recovered most of the money they took from Darren's accounts." "What about the criminal case?" "Sienna got 3 years for fraud and bigamy, but she'll probably be out in 18 months with good behavior. Mira got 5 years because she was the mastermind, and she's also been disbarred." "Good," Ariel said firmly. "They were mean to Daddy, and mean people should go to jail." "That's not exactly how the legal system works, sweetheart, but in this case, justice was served." Ariel was coloring on the paper placemat, drawing a picture of our house with both of us standing in front of it. She'd been in therapy to help her process everything that had happened, and she was doing remarkably well. "Grandpa Frank," she said without looking up from her drawing, "do you think Mom will want to see me when she gets out of jail?" It was a question she'd asked several times, and I still didn't have a good answer. "I don't know, sweetheart. But if she does, and if you want to see her, we'll figure out a way to make that happen safely." "I think I might want to see her, just to ask her why she did those bad things." "That's a very mature attitude, Ariel. Your dad would be proud of you." "I miss him." "I miss him too. But you know what? I think he's watching over us, making sure we're okay." "Like a guardian angel?" "Exactly like that." Dorian cleared his throat. "Speaking of guardian angels, I have some news about the investigation." "What kind of news?" "The FBI got involved because Mira was running similar scams in other states. Turns out you weren't her first target. She's been marrying widows and helping them defraud their late husbands' estates for years." "How many other families did she hurt?" "At least 6 that they've found so far. But here's the good part. Because of the evidence you found and Ariel's recordings, they're able to build cases for all the other victims, too." I thought about Darren's hidden safe, about the documents he'd left to protect us. His foresight had not only saved our family, but had helped bring justice for other families, too. "Your son was a smart man," Dorian continued. "The private investigator he hired had been building a case for months. If that accident hadn't happened, he would have exposed them himself," I finished. "But the accident gave them the opportunity to put their plan into motion. And they almost got away with it." Almost. But Darren had been smarter than they'd given him credit for. He'd protected what mattered most, his daughter's future and his father's security. After lunch, Ariel and I drove home to the house that was legally ours again. We'd redecorated some of the rooms, putting back the family photos and getting rid of the cold, modern art that Sienna had preferred. The mountain lake painting was back in its place of honor above the fireplace. "Grandpa Frank," Ariel said as we pulled into the driveway, "can we plant flowers in Mom's old garden? I want to make it pretty again." "That's a wonderful idea. What kind of flowers?" "Sunflowers. Daddy always said they were happy flowers because they follow the sun." "Sunflowers it is." That evening, after Ariel was in bed, I sat in the living room looking at the mountain lake painting. Behind it was the safe where Darren had hidden the documents that saved us. But I'd left something else in there, a letter I'd written to my son, thanking him for protecting me and telling him about everything that had happened since he was gone. I'd never been one for speaking to those who were no longer here, but somehow I felt like Darren could still hear me. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but I chose to believe he was at peace, knowing his daughter was safe and his father was no longer alone. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lucia, the housekeeper, who had become like family to us over the past few months. "Mr. Frank, I'm at the grocery store. Should I pick up ingredients for Ariel's favorite cookies?" I smiled and texted back, "Yes, please. And get some ice cream, too. We're celebrating today." "What are we celebrating?" "New beginnings." As I put my phone away, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Ariel appeared in her pajamas, carrying her favorite stuffed animal. "Grandpa Frank? I can't sleep." "Bad dreams?" "No, good dreams. I dreamed about Daddy. He said he was proud of us for being brave." I patted the couch beside me. "Come here, sweetheart." She curled up next to me, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire crackle in the fireplace. "Grandpa Frank?" "Yes?" "Are you happy that I get to live with you forever?" "Happier than I've been in a long time." "Me too. Even though I'm sad about Mom and Daddy, I'm happy about us." "That's okay, you know. You can be sad and happy at the same time. Feelings are complicated like that. Adults are complicated too." I laughed. "Yes, they are. But we'll figure it out together, won't we?" "Together," she agreed and fell asleep against my shoulder. I sat there for another hour, holding my granddaughter and thinking about the strange turns life can take. 6 months ago, I'd been a grieving widower living as a guest in my own home. Now I was a legal guardian with a purpose and a future. Darren's voice echoed in my memory one last time. "That thing will protect you, Dad." He'd been right, but the thing that protected me wasn't just the documents in the safe. It was love. His love for his daughter and his father, expressed through careful planning and legal foresight. It was the love of friends like Dorian who stood by me when things got difficult. It was the love of a little girl who trusted me to take care of her when her world fell apart. And it was my own love for both of them which gave me the strength to fight for what was right. As I carried Ariel upstairs to her bed, I made a silent promise to Darren. I would raise his daughter with the same values he'd tried to pass on to her. Honesty, courage, and the understanding that family isn't defined by lineage, but by the people who stand by you when everything else falls apart. The house settled around us with the familiar creaks and sighs of an old building full of memories. But for the first time since Darren was gone, they sounded comforting, not lonely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, homework to supervise, parent-teacher conferences to attend, teenage years to navigate. But tonight we were safe and together in the home that Darren had made sure would always be ours. I tucked Ariel into her bed and kissed her forehead. "Sweet dreams, sweetheart." "Sweet dreams, Grandpa Frank. I love you." "I love you too." As I turned off her light and headed to my own room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine peace. The battle was over. Justice had been served, and the future, while uncertain, was full of possibility. Darren's final gift to his family had been protection, but it had also been hope. And that, I realized, was the most valuable inheritance of all.